Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this August 12th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and I will not be on YouTube today, so you're just going to have to listen to a voice. Yes, listen to a voice. There's going to be no pictures, and the reason I do that is because I want you to use your own imagination. Yes, paint the pictures in your head while I speak. And in the meantime, after I'm done in this hour, you can go spend your day on YouTube, like millions of other people do. Well, anyway, I'm not opposed to YouTube. All I'm saying is that seems to be where everybody gets their news these days. I mentioned yesterday on my show that there was a poll done in the United States. This was in the United States. Did I mention that? Maybe people thought it was the world, but in the United States there were only 7 people that read a book from cover to cover last year. Interesting. And I explained the books and who the people were, and you can go to my show yesterday. But the point I'm trying to make is technology has made it so easy for us to be deceived. And like I mentioned yesterday, it's easy to deceive a person or a population, a country, a world, but it's harder to show people that they've been deceived. And that's really what we do on this show. So before I get back to yesterday, we started a series I want to do on Sandy Hook for good reason. It kind of explains really false flags and what people will believe and how government agencies all get together and can pull off a hoax like this. Amazing, for a goal, an agenda. Their agenda is to take away weapons in America, to basically disarm a population, and opposed to the contrary to the Second Amendment. Now, I always said this is a sham, because if you're a criminal, you can get a gun no matter if there's a law or not. And that's what they want. They want guns in the hands of the criminals in government and the criminals on the street. All right, so let's put Sandy Hook aside, and we're going to go to Sophia Smallstorm's good video. I told you there were 2 that I'm going to refer to, which kind of tell you really what really is going on behind the scenes at Sandy Hook. But I want to talk about the Vatican Jesuit global conspiracy today, and this visit by the Pope in September 23rd, 2015, and the significance of this. Now, you're going to hear a lot of garbage out there right now. You're going to hear a lot of things. And all that confusion, to me, is exactly what we're living in, a world of confusion, because of all this information that's right at our fingertips. Now, this show has always been dedicated to showing you the Vatican Jesuit global conspiracy and how America has always been in the lap of Rome since our beginnings. Our founding fathers were basically agents of Rome working to, in a sense, use democracy, use freedom as a cover for what's going on in the world today. And you can see our rights and freedoms are no longer here. This is not America as it's stated in our Constitution. Everybody knows it. We're just lying to ourselves, and it's a big fantasy. But what's really behind it? Now, I think I have a better understanding than most. And I say that not because I'm more intelligent. I'm probably dumber than most for even attempting to get into this subject, knowing how the end is going to play out. But anyway, I feel compelled because I lived in Rome for 7 years. When I went there in the early 80s, I had no idea what this was all about, and learned firsthand by living there. Learned that I was living in the belly of the beast. I was living in a city that housed the Antichrist for centuries and centuries and centuries. And as they said, all roads led to Rome. I ended up there and learned an awful lot about what we talk about today. Now, when I brought this story back to the States, I found that there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of co-intel people out there trying to keep this story out of the news, just like they did in Rome. I can remember trying to get stories, and other journalists trying to get stories over here, and AP, UPI, the American newspapers, all bought and paid for, never got here. Now, there were some enlightening stories that I read in France and in Italy, etc., that never saw the light of day here. So I think I come with a little bit of a personal background on these stories. By no means a scholarly background. I've basically picked up all my information by asking questions and researching as much as I can. I don't think there's been a corner. Oh, I'm sure there's a few corners I haven't dug into, but most everything that I read or see, I've touched in some way throughout my life by living there and researching it one way or the other, because I realized that this was the key story. This is what's being hidden from us. And this now meeting by the Pope and our Congress, allowing him in to spread this kind of information, is only a sign of one thing, that the one world government, which we know they want to form, and the one world spiritual religion based on Satanism, based on the evil empire, are coming together, because it can only be established this way. And it's a sad day for us when this Pope enters this country like this. And most people won't even see it. Most people are going to bow down. There'll be millions and millions of people, accolades you won't believe. He's going to, well, let's just say he's in South America now, saying that capitalism is the evil eye of the world. Then he's going to come here. If capitalism is the evil eye of the world and needs to be destroyed, why are we letting him in this country? Shouldn't he be an enemy of the state? If I said that, do you think I would get a floor anywhere? No. They would call me a communist. They would call me an anti-American, but I guess he's not. Oh, then he's going to ask for climate change and spread the false stories of global warming and that we are the cause of all the problems in the world. And we need to, the big one's going to be distribute the financial wealth. We are too rich. You know something? He is coming here, and together with the politicians and the Federal Reserve and the Vatican, they are the richest organization by none in the world. So if they're going to distribute wealth, take it from them. But what they're trying to do is take what little wealth is left and put it in their pockets so they can control everything. And I'll tell you what, they will get it one way or the other because people believe it based on falsehoods, lies, etc., etc. Now, there's a lot of disinformation even now coming out from people like Alex Jones, who's coming out and saying this Pope has been infiltrated, he's an evil communist. Yes, you're now hearing it publicly, and the reason that you have to pay attention is that they want this information out there now. He's not doing this because he's some kind of truth teller that wants to give you guys the truth. No, he never has been. 10 years ago, he was calling anybody that talked about the Vatican crazy. But now that they want the information out, they want it out in their manner. And the manner they're trying to say is that the church has been infiltrated. There's a good side to the church and the bad side. Well, let me tell you right now, there's never been a good side at the hierarchy of the Vatican, and the Antichrist has been hidden in plain sight since the beginning of time. Not just this man, but the whole ball of wax there has been a cover. They've used Christ. They've used Christianity. They use anything to get their way. And so now in America, you got these people coming out going, I get these emails from people, see, Greg, look at Alex Jones's now. You said that he was this and that. And I said, yeah, I don't care if he's a COINTEL or not. I don't care who is. But I'm telling you why he's doing this. None of these people really want to understand why this information comes out. At what time? For example, remember the old movies, Angels and Demons, all that Dan Brown stuff? That was the same garbage. The Illuminati is trying to infiltrate and get rid of the good white cloth Vatican people. There are none at the top levels. And that's the point. It was a whitewash. It was the false information coming out in the manner that they want you. And that's the reason he's here now. Now, there's so many different... I've looked at September 23rd and the significance of it. There's a Google Doodle that's interesting called the Loch Ness Monster, and decoding this Google Doodle. Go ahead and look for it. Loch Ness Monster Google Doodle, and a guy decodes it, and it's interesting. It doesn't give you any reasons. It talks about the days. Now, we do have the French foreign minister, remember, said that there'll be a calamity, 500 days, a climate calamity in 500 days, and he was with Kerry, and that was 500 days, ends on the 23rd or 24th of this year. Then people say, well, this is just the opening of the door, the calamity to come in the years to come, and they're probably all right. But the point I'm trying to get at is, let's use, I remember years ago I used to interview from the website The Grand Design Exposed, John Daniels, etc., and he was on my show many times, and I know John really understands this stuff. And so I found something quite interesting that he authored recently, and I want to refer to this because we're on the same wavelength, so to speak, when it comes to the Vatican Jesuit global conspiracy and how it's been here from the beginning of time, in a sense, and where it comes from. But we're going to concentrate this morning, and if I don't get to Sandy Hook today, I apologize. I will do that tomorrow. It'll be there tomorrow, don't worry. It'll be there 20 years from now, and we still won't get any justice. So it's not that we're on a definite time frame. So I will get to Small Storms, Unraveling Sandy Hook. Very good look at this story. Another false flag event. But let's concentrate today on this area of discussion. We're going to talk about two things. Now, John, in the Grand Design Exposed, talks about, in 2013, the Jesuit Pope came on the scene. We've never had a Jesuit Pope, and for most people, it doesn't make any difference. They don't even know who the Jesuits are. But for those who know, this is a real interesting point of history, because we know if you understand the Jesuits' fourth vow, if you understand what their role is, the Vatican Guard, the protectors of the Vatican, all the way back to they were formed during the Reformation when Protestantism was threatening the Vatican's power. And so the Jesuits were basically the henchmen, the killers, the ones who lopped off the heads of millions of Christians. They're no different today. They just do it in more sophisticated terms. Now, you'll understand that when you get these other guys out there talking about the Jesuits, many of them say... Now, isn't it interesting, though? And I use Jones a lot because he's out there in the public. He was the first one on a lot of these 9/11 things. And if people don't really understand that he is basically working for the man, then just forget about it. And like I said, I don't really care, because you can learn a lot from these guys, because they got a lot of information that's handed to them, and they put it out at certain times for certain reasons with a hidden agenda, just like their bosses. But they're assigned different targets. They're assigned different areas. So I remember years ago, Jones was always up there going, the Jesuits have changed. They've changed. They're good now. Oh, no, the church doesn't have any money. Now he's changing his tune a bit because they've been infiltrated by the evil, and it'll come out the evil Illuminati. They're really not the Vatican. And the question you have to ask is, why are they coming out with this now? Well, I can give you some thoughts of mine. One, I think they want to basically destroy the Vatican as we know it and create another religion, which will be under their false Antichrist Messiah. That could be a reason. And we've talked about that before. But anyway, so don't listen, you have to look and see, why are these people coming out? And all these, I've had some really smart guys on my show, but some of them just don't get it. And I don't know why. But I know John does. the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. And he's referring to something that Ronald Cook wrote in 1985. But let's talk a little bit about this. The Pope's going to be coming here for a joint... can you believe this? He's going to be speaking to a joint session of Congress, meeting then with Obama, then going to the UN, as if he's like the king of the world. Well, he is. Why would he come just on the heels of saying capitalism is the enemy of the people? Why would the Congress allow him to speak? Well, because he is their boss. And the Vatican has been the boss of this country from the beginning. Now, he'll be coming to promote this climate change encyclical to his, and I might say his Jesuit Congress. Those are his boys in there when you start looking at their backgrounds. But John points out here that the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, the title written by Ronald Cook in 1985, is very profound, and it's a small booklet, and I want you to go out and get it. I'm going to show you how in a minute. The author, basically back then, really had no idea that in 30 years the Vatican would have a Jesuit pope, says John. And to top it off, coming to speak to a joint session of Congress, it's almost prophetic. Now, if you read the introduction, make sure you download the cover of the book. It's interesting, he shares, and I'll get that to you and read the cover for you, and you can get it afterwards. Please share this booklet with everybody. Make it go viral. Send it to all these COINTEL people, too, so they can put their spin on it. And remember, these kind of shows, we don't have corporate money, but we can't exercise what little we have left of freedom of speech. Now, technically, we still have it written in the Constitution. Now, if we choose to use it properly, maybe we can make some kind of... Maybe we could draw at least a few people into that area of understanding of this story being the key to the opening of the door of the New World Order once and for all in this country. Now, John says this. He says, when reading this booklet, and he wrote an introduction himself, remember Ronald Cook wrote this in 1985. The world did not have a Jesuit pope. The founding of the Jesuits in 1534, he says, was to counter the Reformation. Now on September 23rd, 2015, a Jesuit pope, counter-Reformation, is coming to America to speak to a joint session of Congress. Now, here's my question to all of you. Knowing the Jesuits haven't changed, why would we even allow them in our country when it was formed if they were basically opposed to Christianity? Now, we call ourselves a Christian country. We know that Catholicism is not Christianity. I've pointed that out on many shows and showed you the differences. But they like to call themselves Christians. And why? Because they are using it as a cover. They are talking out of both sides of their mouth. They are not Christians. The Jesuits are not Christians. But they've been here so long because in the beginning they had a plan. And we've exercised and showed us through hidden signs and symbols that we'll point out here a little bit today, that they still are in control, even more so than in the beginnings of this country when they formed our Capitol building. Our Capitol is built on Jesuit land. And we've discussed this whole story. But it seems always to go in one ear and out the other of people. They don't want to know the truth. They go to the Washington Monument thinking that's a symbol of freedom, when it's actually a symbol to ISIS. And we've gotten into that, and it doesn't matter to people. They don't want to believe what's been ingrained in their minds, because it is very difficult to show people they have been deceived. But John asks, what does this tell us then? When he's coming to a joint session of Congress, when we're opening our arms to this man as if he's our leader, what does this tell us in 2015? It reveals, says John, that Christians are under a strong delusion used, from the teachings of futurism and are unaware that the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, that not just historically, we can prove this, is coming to address lawmakers as if he's our leader to celebrate the completion of what John calls the Jesuit counter-reformation of America. So now, what are they doing? They're doing the exact same thing they did in 1534 to America, the last bastion, so to speak, of freedom, which they hate, by the way. Freedom is not what they're all about. And we've talked many times, you can go and they've written it before. In the Civita Cattolica of the Jesuits, they wrote that fascism is their political choice. It's their choice. They'd prefer a fascist world. So why are we allowing them to speak here unless we are a fascist state? And there are many symbols in Congress that show that we are. When you start looking even over the House of Representatives, you'll find two fasci, Roman fasci, right there behind the Speaker of the House. Or maybe the Senate, either one of those two. I get them confused. But they've got them all over when you go and when you really start looking at the hidden symbols of Washington. Now, and John points out one Bible verse which we can read. He says in 2 Thessalonians 2, 10 and 11, "And with all deceivableness and unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause, he says, God shall send them this strong delusion, that they should believe a lie." And you know how many people believe a lie today? Amazing. We even got into, for 16 shows that I did on how NASA has been lying to us with these false computer-generated images that we live on a globe. When in fact, I would say that it is false. We do not live on a globe. When you start really looking into it, you'll see that it's much different. So when we've been lied to, and people are going to believe all these lies, now they're going to believe the Antichrist and that he's going to bring a whole great world to us. You're going to see how this plays out in the future. But like I said, this is a key day in the beginning of this so-called New World Order, how America will change. And basically is the Jesuit culmination of the Counter-Reformation here in 2015, and you're living right through it. Now, John says this, understand that the introduction is not to take away from the author and the points made in his booklet, but remember the author didn't know that in 2013 we would have a Jesuit Pope. When he wrote the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, he had no idea that Jesuits have complete charge of the Vatican, and the Jesuit Pope would speak to a joint session of Congress in 2015. So when you read this, realize that the conspiracy is alive, well, and proceeding on schedule. And I might add, in all aspects, governmental, financial, sociological, and spiritual. Now, in this booklet, a name that's familiar to me, but not many people in this country, we'll get to Pedro Arrupe, the Black Pope at the time, was mentioned. And we'll get into that after the break, because we're going to have to take a break here, and come back and talk about this booklet, as well as September 23rd, the significance of it, back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com on this August 12th, 2015 day on our calendar. This is part 2, last 30 minutes of our show today. And I just wanted to let you know that we concentrate here for years on the Investigative Journal on the Vatican Jesuit connection to the history of our country, the history of the world, how it has never changed, and how now it is coming to a culmination in this one world government, one world order, how the Counter-Reformation will take place in this country, and how they've usurped Christianity. Incredible story, one that people shy away from because they just can't believe it, and they don't want to see how they've been deceived. And unfortunately, it's a mistake. You have to listen to this story. You have to read up on it. You have to understand that the Antichrist, and you know, a lot of times when I say that, I know there's a lot of people out there going, oh, this is just another religious BS. Well, it's not, because I'm not just talking from a spiritual point of view. I'm talking from a secular point of view. And if you want to see a better world for yourself and your kids, you better listen. That's all I have to say about that. But anyway, we're talking about this booklet written by Ronald Cook called The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, that was written in 1985, and John Daniels from Grand Design Exposed has written an introduction and a plea for people to read it and to understand it. And we're at a point where John is mentioning that in the book on page 10, Cook brings up Pedro Arrupe, the Black Pope, from 63 to 83. And chapter 1 is called The Jesuits in History, a good one to read. It's a good little book. I've read it several times years ago, and I can't. I'm glad that I picked this up and saw that John had brought it back for people to understand right before the Pope comes. Now, Ronald Cook mentions author Gary Allen in his book. He said he wrote a book called None Dare Call It a Conspiracy, using the Black Pope Pedro Arrupe to identify conspiracies and give us the agenda of the conspirators, who are the people we talk about in this show. Here is a quote from the Black Pope Jesuit Pedro Arrupe. Now listen to this. This godless society operates in an extremely efficient manner, at least in its higher levels of leadership. It makes use of every possible means at its disposal, be they scientific, technical, social, or economic. It follows a perfectly mapped out strategy. It holds almost complete sway in international organizations and financial circles, in the field of mass communications, press, cinema, radio, and television. And may I add that all of you out there following this fantasy election, and those of you on the left getting behind Hillary, those of you on the right getting behind Donald Trump, isn't that a joke? But anyway, they got him out there in his toupee. He's got to be wearing one. These people all work for the Pope. It doesn't matter if they're left or right. You think they're going to allow this guy to have this much money and spread all this? He's giving this big, anti-immigration, and then Hillary is for immigration. It's the old Hegelian dialectic at work, and don't fall into it. I say the best. Wouldn't it be great if the only people that went to vote were those that were running for office and nobody just showed up? What the heck would they do then? They realize they have a problem. But since millions and millions of people still believe this BS, they realize they got us by the you-know-what. So anyway, the Black Pope, in this case, says John Daniels, gives a perfect description of how the biggest conspiracy on earth works. He's actually describing how the Jesuits operate the global conspiracy. Now, this is very important because, why he said, now you go, well, why would a Jesuit say that? Because he is trying to basically be like Alex Jones and saying, no, we're the good side. This is the good side of the Vatican. And see, these other people are trying to do this. And we're here to warn you. Well, they are the ones doing it. So let's just get things straight once and for all. Now, he's actually describing how the Jesuits and how this Pope is operating right now, and you're going to see it play out right here in front of your own eyes in another month or so. He's describing how the Jesuits operate this global conspiracy. Now, John says, this is a very important point. He says, remember that Gary Allen's book is about how global conspiracies operate in the world. We have to see what is being done here is using Jesuit casuistry and sophistry. By having the Black Pope, Arupe, in Gary Allen's book take the eyes off the Jesuits and allows them to operate the global conspiracy unseen. Because he says this is the puppet masters, the Jesuits, are behind the curtain, pulling the strings. It is like the pot calling the kettle black. Now, the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy is taking the focus of the real conspiracy by using the Black Pope to give us the definition of the conspiracy. John says, this takes my breath away as I read this. Why? I read Gary Allen's book in 93, and at the time I knew nothing, he says, about the Jesuits. Let's look at how they operate using casuistry and sophistry. Casuistry. Dishonest reasoning on questions of morality by application of general principles, like same-sex marriage, abortion, or future Antichrist. Casuistry is a system of rationalization to do legally what is forbidden morally. Now, sophistry, the art of influencing the thought and conduct of an audience by argumentation that is seemingly plausible, but is actually invalid and misleading. It's like 9/11 and the government's version of what happened, or like the JFK assassination, or like Sandy Hook, or like many of these other false flags, and the lone gunman story that was told to the general public, even as back as far as Abraham Lincoln. Remember, the lone gunman story is being taught as fact in the educational systems of the world. It is not fact, but it seemingly sounds plausible, but it's actually a lie. And this is how it operates. Because the liars are the government telling you, or the Vatican telling you this stuff. Now, I was in Rome when Pope John Paul, before John Paul II, was killed. And they did the same thing there that they did to Kennedy. It's amazing how they killed their own if he wasn't playing their game. Now let's look, says John, at how the two work together to deceive and mislead. And let's, I'm going to use a quote from Tupper Saucy's book, chapter 9, page 74, to explain this. The sophistry as a method of argument. How far has Jesuit casuistry and sophistry infiltrated our world? Listen to what Saucy says. And we've done much on his book, and I really have to get back to that. I was sidetracked by the flat earth, but I've got plenty of time for the flat earth because I'm going to be taking my retirement in my manner. You know how people like retirement cruises? I'm going to take a cruise to the ice wall, the great ice wall. That's the way I'm going to spend my time. A lot of good fishing, a lot of good times. No YouTubes, none. I'm not taking any YouTubes. Not even going to pretend. What happens when they pull the plug on you guys? And you can't do this stuff. You know, for me, I can just go out with a blowhorn, go in the park, and just talk. I'm not really worried about the internet. Because I probably get as many people listening to me here as I would if I went into the park. So it doesn't matter to me. But what about all you YouTube guys? You know, I see a million hits on this, a million hits on that. And, you know, I know what I found about this, the better the story, the truer the story, the less the hits. The more meaningless, the more lying stories, the more hits. 10 million hits on the craziest things you'll ever see in the world that are untrue, sophistry, casuistry, Jesuit BS. But those are the ones that listen to it. So YouTube, do you think about it? How they use it. And it's a great way of figuring out who's on what side and who's on the other. They want to know who you are if you talk like this. Now, this is what Saucy said about casuistry, sophistry, and how far have we really gotten? He says, America's understanding has been systematically bent to the will of the church militant, while the intellectual means for sensing the capture have been disconnected. Most of the content of modern media, whether television, radio, print, film, stage, or web, is a state-of-the-art Jesuit ratio studio. Now, I'm going to add this. I have done stories and research for years and years, Jesuit theater, Jesuit history, Jesuit education throughout the centuries. And this is taking place right here in our educational system. It is nothing more than Jesuit ratio studiorum, let's call it. The Jesuit college is no longer just a chartered institution. It has become an entire social environment. The movies, the mall, the school, the home, the mind. Human experience has become a spiritual exercise, managed by charismatic spiritual directors who know how to manipulate a democracy's emotions, logic, perspective, national memory, and self-discipline are purged to the point that unbridled emotional responses, as economist Thomas Sowell put it, are all we have left. Now, you know, when you look at this, and this is interesting because I'm going to show you how to get this booklet. And I'm going to mention it. This is Cook's booklet, so you can read it before the Pope comes here. Now, John Daniels mentions this. He says, I want to reflect on the picture that is on the cover of this booklet. It comes out of the book, Washington in the Lap of Rome, 1888. Okay, this is a good book. I remember reading this myself. Author Justin D. Fulton. Now, how come you don't get that in universities? It's a great book, Washington in the Lap of Rome. The text, because history is revised for you. Under that remember the last paragraph I just read by Saucy? They revise it so they don't want you to know this stuff. And he says a picture is worth 1,000 words in this. The original book, the text below, was from the original book in 88. Read the words and look at the cover. And I'm going to try to, well, you can't, I'm going to show you the cover. But here it is. To Americans who will aid in throttling Jesuitism, in uncoiling the serpent encircling the capital of the United States, and in taking Washington out of the lap of Rome, that a free church, a free school, and a free state may make the great republic the glory of the world. That was on the cover, written back then. And let's look at the cover of the Vatican Jesuit conspiracy, okay? And on the front cover, you see it says the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, Ronald Cook, 1985. You got a picture of the Capitol building, then you'll see Rome and a few other things with a serpent around it. The serpent has entwined its fold about the Capitol. Above, picture out of this picture on the Jesuit conspiracy was taken from a book written in 1888, the picture by Justin D. Fulton. And that quote I said was on that book. And maybe I should read it to you again, because this is what they were saying then. They haven't changed now. But we haven't listened to it, and they have basically brainwashed everybody to believe that they're doing good. Now, it says this: to Americans who will aid in throttling Jesuitism, in uncoiling the serpent, encircling the capital of the United States, and in taking Washington out of the lap of Rome, that a free church and a free school and a free state may make the great republic the glory of the world. And so, are you one of the Americans that are aiding the throttling, the movement of the Jesuits in this country? Of course, most are. And that's why we don't have a free schools anymore, a free church, a free republic. Now, we've gone over on the back cover, we have gone over so many signs and symbols that exist in Washington and all over the world, that what we talk about, the Vatican conspiracy here, is fact. Now, here's a couple more. Think about this: Inquisition in America. Now this is in your House of Representatives, are busts of 2 Roman Catholic popes. And not just any 2 popes, but the 2 men responsible for founding the greatest Inquisition, a movement unlike any other horror recorded in history of mankind, worse than the Holocaust of World War II, for it gripped all of Europe with terror for nearly 600 years. Now, the bust of Pope Gregory the Ninth, I believe it is, and Pope Innocent III are right there in your House of Representatives for you to look at, and they're looking over their holdings here in America. Now, why in a free country, supposed country formed of Christians, would we allow these 2 busts to be in our House of Representatives unless this is what's controlling it behind the scenes? And that's not the only things you find. You can go up on the top of the Capitol building. You can talk. We've talked so many different signs there. I just wanted to mention these 2. Now, listen to this, though, which makes it even more interesting. On the cover, it says, yet in 1949 and 1950, a series of relief portraits over the gallery doors of the House chamber were added to the interior of the U.S. Capitol and were intended to depict, quote, historical figures noted for their work in establishing the principles that underlie American law. Men like Thomas Jefferson and George Mason are to be found on the list, which makes sense to most students of history, and with them are the host of others, at least some of whom seem acceptable. In the midst of this collection, we find Pope Innocent III, and with him Pope Gregory IX, 2 of history's most wicked figures, arguing that these men truly influenced a government that is dedicated to the cause of human freedom requires a twisted imagination. Just a couple little symbols. Now, remember this: prior to the American Revolution, which was fomented and organized by the Jesuits, and we talked about Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci, who might as well be just another founding father. And I say most of the important people behind the scenes are never even mentioned. Now, Daniels wants us to remember this, so I'll point this out, that prior to the American Revolution, Catholics in the 13 colonies were forbidden to vote or to hold political office because of the centuries-old conflict between Rome and Protestant England. And we should have been smart and kept them out for good. But, and I'm adding this, the reason that we didn't was they were going to use this sort of persecution that they wanted to depict to the world, that they were being persecuted when they were the persecutors, to get in there, get their feet in the door. That's what they used our founding fathers for, because the founding fathers worked for them. And once they got their foot in their door, not only did they put Washington, D.C. on their land, and and there was only one diocese then. Check how many dioceses there are in the country today. You will be shocked. And why did they call the Cardinal of New York the most powerful man in the world, in the United States? Now, remember this. But once that revolution was over and universal toleration was declared, the agents of Romanism immediately went to work to claim this country on behalf of the Pope. Fulton, in his book in 1888, argued that the ancient conflict that had been responsible for the bloody horrors of the Dark Age had indeed come to the shores of the New World. And you're seeing it today. The Pope coming here, speaking at the joint sessions of Congress, is the signal of the next the Reformation in this country, the Counter-Reformation, to finally put an end to America as we know it. Now, incredibly, Fulton actually believed that Rome might be able to resurrect the Inquisition of American soil if the people were not awakened to the imminent danger. Was there any truth to his warning? Yes, nobody's aware. That's what. Nobody's aware of this imminent danger. That's why we're letting this guy with that, wears that funny dress and the funny hat in. Now, with that fresh in our minds, says Daniels, we have understanding what it means to have a Jesuit Pope coming to speak to a joint session of Congress on September 23, 2015. We now can see Justin D. Fulton's warning has come to pass. Now look at the cover, like we talked, or think about that cover, and there is 1,000 words on that cover. The serpent has entwined its fold about the Capitol. That's what this Pope is doing. You know, we've talked about this many times. Well, what did men have to say about Rome in the 1800s? Oh, we've went through history. We've gone through so many quotes. But then, you know, people come out and say, well, they've changed today. Well, they haven't. Brigadier General Thomas H. Harris, 1897, author of Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, quote, Rome is simply a political machine for the enslavement of mankind. It is a monstrous despotism, relying on ignorance and its natural offspring, superstition, for its support. It's not a religion that we are called upon to fight, but a corrupt and most dangerous political organization whose purpose is nothing short of destruction of our government. Whatever it may be as a religion does not concern our present contention. And that is what's happening today. He's coming in, the Pope is coming into our halls of government. These men in government work with him, and they are destroying the last remnants of basically what they created. The guise is going to be up. That's what basically is happening here. No longer are they going to have to work undercover. Now, a quote from Samuel Morse, the inventor of Morse Code in 1835. He said, the food of popery is ignorance. Ignorance is the mother of papal devotion. Ignorance is the legitimate prey of popery. Ignorance, the condition of being uneducated, unaware, and uninformed. And that's what majority of Americans are, and I don't really care about it anymore, because the more you talk about it, the more you talk about truth, the more you talk about this story, the more that a few get it, most people don't want to hear it. But I'm going to say it anyway. It has to be said. Now, the booklet, The Vatican Jesuit Conspiracy, in light of 2015, will find Cook to be very profound and will be able to connect the dots with the real conspiracy, the biblical, historical, and the prophetic Antichrist. Now Daniel says, clear our minds of any preconceived idea and let true biblical history reveal what the man of perdition is coming here for and why we should be aware of it. Now, in Revelation 17:5, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. That's who's coming here to speak, folks. Now, Cardinal Gibbons stated on page 106, Faith of Our Fathers, 1917 edition, the penetration of the religion of Babylon became so general and well known that Rome was called the New Babylon. Well, New Babylon is now here in America, alive and well. And that's what September 23rd is all about. It's the initiation. It's the uncovering of the veil. They're going to have to, no longer going to have to hide. What they're going to do, though, is hide behind a false prophet, a false Messiah that's going to lead everybody, supposedly, to a better world, a one world, a unified world. And you know what? If you believe that, You can believe that old statement, I'll buy oceanfront property in Arizona. Because that has about as much truth as what they're going to tell you September 23rd, 2015. You're listening to the Investigative Journal. Tomorrow we'll be back. I want to get back to Sandy Hook and Sophia Smallstorm, a great interpretation of it. So have a good evening and good night.